G'day coaches, I've got some great news. My online course, Evolve Rugby, is ready and part 1 is going to be launched on October 31st, 2022. On top of that, I'll be offering a discounted price for listeners of the podcast first before advertising the course anywhere else. I want to reward you for being such loyal listeners of the show. Check out the rugbycoachescorner.com and hit the online course tab to sign up for your discount code. I'll also put a link to the website in the show notes of this episode. 12 video modules, downloadable PDF worksheets, a reflective journal, closed Facebook community, and more is what you'll get with Evolve Rugby. I can't wait to launch this thing, so check out the website in the show notes and enjoy this episode. Cheers.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode 107 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Josh Macy. Josh is the head coach of Lindenwood University in the United States. Having started playing the sport in college, he then went on to coach in a variety of summer camps and then eventually made his way to Guatemala, where he had a major role in introducing the sport there. He's even captained their national team, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show now. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problems. And well, before we get into your playing backstory, Guatemala, I've been there twice as a backpacker. I absolutely love that country, and I can see how you get hooked in there.
Yeah, so my wife and I were there for 3 years
Sweet.
as like international volunteer teachers at a small school in Quetzaltenango. If you were a backpacker,
Yeah,
you
no, I
probably would have
remember.
made it
Yeah, I
through.
went there. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
so
sure.
Shayla is what, Guatemalans or travelers would call it. And we had a little apartment, and and just talking about sport with my, a bunch of my Guatemalan buddies, a few expat buddies I made. We just decided to start having practices. We'd mess around with a ball and
Yeah.
and then of course, everybody's hanging out in the evening and we're saying, oh, we should start a team. We should start a team. This is so fun. And we sat. I'm sure you'd been in this exact spot before if you'd been to the city. We sat at this huge pass through, like where tons of people would walk by, and we sat there with a pad of paper. And every time somebody even remotely athletic walked by, we'd call them over. And if they were an expat, I would, speak to them. And if they were Guatemalan, my buddies would speak to them. And we said we would try to have a real practice when we filled up 2 pages of names and phone numbers and email addresses. And
Cool.
and it took us a couple nights. We had to do a lot of hard yards with the buckets of beer and talking to strangers and things like that. But we eventually got there. And I think in the 100 text messages we sent and emails we sent, we ended up with like 12 people that showed up for the first practice.
It's awesome.
And I'm sure I have a photo somewhere, but it was, some guys I taught with and friends of friends and a few random people. And I mean, to this day, it's one of the most rewarding processes I've ever, been involved with in rugby. And from there, we set up little flyers around the town. And these guys who went to university in Cuba, there's a lot of French influence in Cuban universities. And so they taught rugby in Cuba.
Yeah.
And so they were teaching in Guatemala City. And they called me one day. They got my phone number from one of those little flyers. And I didn't speak Spanish at the time, and they didn't speak English. So I actually gave the phone to one of my Guatemalan students, and he negotiated the first match. And he said, they're going to start a team in Guatemala City. We have a team like here in Shayla. your first match is November. And he handed me the phone and went back and sat at his desk.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that student's like a CEO somewhere now, or
Yeah.
something like that. It's like he was my agent on the phone, getting our first action around. And then the other thing he said was, "Oh, they don't have any equipment. They need you to send them some." And
Mm.
so,
I
so
think
I
the other guy on the other end of the phone's the CEO.
yeah, exactly. So I petitioned some of the clubs that I had played for, and I had done a little bit of coaching
Mm.
here in the States. And they kind of gathered up some balls and cones. And so the Austin Huns I had played for, who eventually became Austin Elite, and now
Yep.
the Gilgronis.
Yep.
I had played
What?
for the Richmond
Not the
Lions.
greatest name. Just gonna
No,
put it out
no,
there.
I'm with you on that one. And then the Richmond Lions, and I had coached a little bit at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, very, very small school in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually got a load of stuff together. And
That's awesome.
yeah, the mail system didn't work that well in Guatemala when we were there. So we basically bought a bus ticket for a bag of balls and
Oh,
put it
that's
underneath the
hilarious.
bus. Yeah, and told them, it's on the 5 o'clock Galgos bus leaving. It's a Greyhound bus leaving Shayla to Guatemala City, and they had to be right there to like
Mm.
get it off of the bottom of the bus. And then,
Oh, I've been to those bus stations too. That's
oh,
total chaos.
oh yeah, absolute chaos. But
Yeah.
it's the best kind of chaos. And it's like that's the stuff that traveling can do
Mm.
for a young person, right? It kind of gave
Yeah.
me initiative and opportunity to develop the game in my own way, develop my own opinions about the game. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of those lessons are with me, to this day.
Yeah. You get that freedom too. Like it's not you're yeah, sure, you might be seen as an authority on the game because of your background and that you've played it before. But you're not in an area where the game is played heavily, so you get to experiment a lot. It's very safe. You get to make a bunch of mistakes, and yeah, you get to really kind of tap into the authenticity of the game and what it can do for people.
Absolutely. And a lot said now about how people respond to the game, especially in the professional world,
Mm,
with the introduction of social media, right? So
yeah,
you might, as a coach, be really excited about an activity you've come up with, and maybe you put it on Twitter, like, just because you're proud of it or something. And you have somebody who's not even coaching being like, "Oh, well, when I was in schools, mate, well, we never did that."
yeah,
And it's like everybody has a license to criticize everybody else. And
mm,
I kind of I kind of appreciate that back then I was in my own little world, right? And
yeah,
if I wanted to try something, there was really no fear on what players thought of it, what other coaches thought of it, or and now you have people who are frankly scared to lose their jobs, right? Because
yeah,
they're kind of had how at like publicly or anything like that, and they're worried they're going to get found out, right? It's that
mm,
imposter syndrome that every
yeah,
coach deals with a little bit. But
for
what if
sure.
you were what if you were coaching in a vacuum, and none of that mattered at all, right? What would you do
Yeah,
differently?
yeah. Well, I think that's Michael Checker has pros and cons, but one of the things I really like about him is he's got so much else going on in his life that essentially rugby coaching for him is a hobby, and he
Mm.
just does it at the highest level. So his philosophy is he just loves the game and he loves being around the boys and he loves getting the group together and to perform. And I think that's a quality that every coach can grab onto and just say, you know what, I just do it because I love it, and it's easier said than done. But if you can keep that mindset and be true to the sport, um, it can be a pretty lonely place sometimes as a head coach, and God knows what it's like at the professional level when you're losing. So I think there's some good messages there.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure the players Cheka has coached over the years have taken a lot from that mindset as well. I think I've coached a number of players who are just so desperate to make something of themselves.
Mm,
Because too much of their identity is wrapped up in rugby, that we've kind of got to pull it apart, right, and put it back together. now at the university level, it's like, well, what are your other professional and academic opportunities? What are your interests off the field? And if you're not getting good answers from players when you ask those questions, you need to do some work with them there, right? And if you have varied interest, if you're that sort of like T person, you're wide in a
Mm.
lot of areas and deep in one or two, you're just being a good example to those players that really need to untangle their identity from rugby as a game played on grass.
100%. All right. Well, what about some of those things from Guatemala that have really stuck with you all those years back that you still, feel have relevance now, and that you kind of maybe catch yourself every now and then going, oh, I learned that there, or that was important to me back in Jella.
So I think now, and this was something that a boss of mine communicated to me like back in my summer camp days as well. He kept this soccer ball on his desk
Hmm.
that was made by tied together and stuffed plastic bags.
Wow.
And I know whenever I would have this sort of like outlandish idea and I'd want to spend a bunch of money or something like that, he would just toss it to me, right? And he had picked that soccer ball up on his travels, because he'd seen like some kids that lived on the street playing soccer, right, in an alley.
Mm, mm.
And I think the sort of like resourcefulness and creativity, um, you know, can take you far as a coach. I think it's easy. We were talking about the ills of the sort of social media flexes that coach have, and you see coaches now that
Mm.
are posting like the latest greatest equipment, and that everything is cutting edge, and oh,
Or
this
the
bat,
or the worst referees.
yeah, that too.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Not a fan, just personally.
and I think when I look back at that, it's like, oh well, if only we had a spaceship to teleport us to all of our matches. Well, yeah, that'd be
Mm,
really great for their
mm,
bodies and our
yeah,
recovery and things like that. But sometimes you just need to reset and kind of take it back to the simple,
yeah.
take it back to the resourceful. And that's something that, and we're a really well resourced university program in America. I don't want to make it seem like, we're street kids playing in an alley by any means, but
Mm,
if you're not willing to bring that resourcefulness and that creativity, you're going to squander a lot of your resources.
yeah, yeah.
And so we try to be really good stewards of what we have, and always try to think of another way. Like I always joke with my coaches now that with the places I've coached and the places I've been, like our problems as a team are not real problems. That,
Hmm.
like, they wouldn't be salient outside of this office. Like, most people in the world would just laugh at us, if
Yeah.
if we really labored over these problems. And obviously, to players you're dealing with in the moment, or people who have like real things wrong in your life, you need to think long and hard about those things and give
Mm,
people compassion and attention that they deserve. um, but where there is a will, there is a way. And I think that's something I learned in my time in the third world, and in the summer camp world before that.
yeah, I think that's an important one, and you see that lost a lot in certain environments, but also other environments. It's not like, the All Blacks and New Zealand rugby's pretty well renowned for having pretty, humble kind of facilities, and nothing too amazing. And there's talks of when Dan Carter went over to France, going, oh, we'd never do this over here with like these kind of posh kind of conditions and things like that. And I think that's good. And if you do have those great conditions, you can get it through community and reconnecting with those around you, and volunteer work and those kind of things to keep the group and the community humble.
Yeah, and I would point to the sevens world. You look at Fiji stringing, multiple gold medals together,
Mm,
lifting weights in a pavilion, running
yeah,
sand hills,
yeah,
carrying each other, and not much more.
mm,
And I suppose that's both literal and figurative.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's easy to focus on, again, the brand new hit shield from such and such a company that's going to revolutionize the game.
Mm,
Um, but at its core, I mean, coaches say it all the time, right? At its core, rugby is a simple game, and sometimes we just have to let it be that.
yeah, 100%. Totally agree. And what about you as a player? When did you start playing? What were those kind of first experiences like that made you, fall in love with the game initially?
So most Americans in my generation, I'm late 30s. Our first exposure to rugby was at college or university,
Yeah.
and so I played the gamut of your typical American sports, football, basketball, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And our university had a very I wouldn't even say it was poorly organized. I'll just say it was a non-organized rugby club that had been operating
Yeah.
for like 30 years or something like that. It's much more organized now, like to all of our, to all of our delights. But
Mm.
um, yeah, and so I just saw the game as this sort of like crazy, chaotic, athletic space, right?
Yeah.
Before I understood any of it, right?
Mm.
Again, with most American sports, like I played a lot of football, like American football, and
Hmm.
so everything was about structure and knowing exactly where you're supposed to be. But I played a lot of basketball. That was kind of my first love and what I played
Yeah.
every night until the street lights came on,
Hmm.
And so the sort of like passing to space, support, like those are concepts, keeping the ball away from your body. Those are all like really basketball 101, right?
Yeah.
So the my background just kind of helped me fall in love with the game. And rugby in America then was like very countercultural.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways the game in America still suffers from those origins.
Hmm.
um, but when you're 19 and stubborn and don't care what anybody says, those are pretty attractive qualities
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about basketball. I've always found like, I've been in Canada for 15 years, and coaching high school for 11 years of that 15, and I've always found the basketball guys have always been the ones who have transferred the most seamlessly. And it is that space, it's that, awareness of what's around you. It's a 360 game, but uh they've got the ability to adapt to depth and space and width. And I've always found, well, certain players, but the majority of football players have been the hardest to convert, because of the stop start whistle, very singular kind of ideas on what your role is. And yeah, I think there's some good observations there in terms of like picking up the sport in a country where it's not the normal game.
Yeah, and I give me a basketball player before the gain line and after the gain line, but give me a
Hmm.
wrestler at the gain line
Oh
all
yeah,
day.
wrestlers are great, eh? Oh
It's
yeah,
too bad, it's too bad in America they're the same season, so there's no
yeah,
overlap between the
yeah,
sports because you could make your perfect crossover rugby player. But
for sure.
there's a lot of good work going on, like out in Colorado with the Raptors program, and
Right.
even a lot of MLR teams are starting to kind of sniff around the crossover space. And
Hmm.
uh
Hmm.
and we're I think the level of as rugby programs at universities have become more and more organized, we're getting better and better athletes. I was a crossover athlete in the sense that I was not athletic enough to play my favorite sports at my university, right?
Hmm.
But now, I've coached plenty of students who were applauded in their sport, but still wanted to try rugby
Yeah.
anyways, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's a credit to sort of university investment and the really unique situation we have in American universities here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what about coaching? What was some of the, your first experiences, and some of those moments where you're like, oh, okay, could have done that better, or wow, that was amazing, and I think I can grow from that and develop that.
Yeah, so I worked in the summer camping industry
Hmm.
as I was wrapping up my education, and the thing is, there, like everything has to be fun and everything has to be flexible because
Perfect.
you
What a
never, yeah,
great
right,
grounding. Yeah,
perfect. and
yeah,
and and you had to coach for pretty much 8 hours a day, 6 days
yeah.
a week for 12 weeks straight through the
Some
summer,
good
right?
reps. Yep.
Yeah, so you get your time in, right? And it wasn't only, and wasn't just coaching, and I did a little bit of rugby with kids and things like that, but I was doing, you know, I was teaching 8-year-old girls how to play volleyball and 12-year-old boys how to play soccer, and
Hmm.
and so you just kind of end up seeing coaching as more of a craft.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something completely separate of the sport. And again, in the university setting now, that's one of the things I appreciate most about it is I can go watch a basketball practice, I can go watch a soccer practice, a football practice, and have dialogues with those coaches, and in a really sort of easy but intentional work environment. And so I would say too, a weird story of mine that is kind of burned in my brain is this was in Texas, most of my summer camp experience, and we had this one term, and it was almost all kids from Mexico. And again, didn't speak Spanish before I lived in
Hmm.
Guatemala for some time, and even how much I spoke Spanish would be debatable to my friends, right? And so
After a
uh
few gallos, you'd be pretty loose, though,
man, you know it, that's for sure. And so we had this whole camp full of Mexican kids that we couldn't communicate, and we used to play dodgeball inside of a batting cage, so there was nowhere to run.
huh?
And I remember, it sounds like torture, but the kids would get into
They
it.
would have loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, you blow the whistle, they all go get
Yeah.
the balls. And I remember this one student who was he was very rotund. He was not an athlete by any means,
Yeah.
but he decided the best use of his talents was, I'm going to stand in front of the kids who can throw the ball really well and try to like block with a ball, right?
Right.
And he figured out this strategy all on his own, and I'm just kind of watching that kid, and just kind of getting lost thinking about team stuff and coaching and things like that. And there was one time where his team had lost all of the balls, right? And it was just him and the best player on the team. And this little porker, right,
Yeah.
from Monterrey, Mexico, backed the really good kid into the corner and like grabbed the sides of the batting cage to protect him and closed his eyes like he was in a firing squad, right? Like closed his eyes, like did the like Hail Mary sign,
Mm,
and just waited for his inevitable destruction, right?
yeah.
And so all the balls hit this kid, and then the really good kid gets all the balls and just gets everybody out, and they won, right? And
Awesome.
so
So he's a tight
yeah,
end prop now, is what you're saying.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. And like I think my whole life I've just been kind of chasing that moment, like looking
Mm,
for those kids on my teams now and the teams
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
coached, like who is really just putting themselves out there for the team.
Yeah.
And it's in rugby, it hurts a little bit more than a kickball,
Mm,
from time to time. But I just am always drawn to those kids that are so consumed by the idea of team that they're really just willing to do whatever it takes. And
yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to have worked with, dozens of them, here in my job now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great story. And yeah, just before that, you mentioned all the sports you coached, and I yeah, some stage in my high school coaching journey, I put my hand up to coach volleyball for 2 years, having never played it, knowing nothing about it. And I thought, you know what, I wanna do this because I wanna coach a sport that I have no clue about, but I want to apply the coaching principles that I know a lot about in rugby. And I had such a fun season. And what I learned from that season was the approach, the pedagogical approach is really, really important, but then the technical knowledge is also as important. So what I lacked that I couldn't give the team was like a really good technical grounding and tactical grounding. What I could do was like create a really fun games-based environment that they'd never probably experienced before in volleyball. But if I was to do it again, I would bring someone in who was a volleyball player and had that technical skill. So I think any coaches out there who just want to focus on rugby, exploring other sports is key.
So with volleyball being like what do they call it? Like a tower defense game or a missile
Hmm.
game, right? Where
Hmm.
you're defending more static space. Um, how do you think that changes the approach to coaching? Because, rugby, soccer, basketball, all invasion games, win space, create
Mm.
opportunity. How does that side of the sport change it in your opinion?
Well, that's probably where I fell short. Was I didn't recognize that until you just told me that. So I basically went about the game where I would play games like I would in rugby. I'd have maybe a 6-on-4, and the four got a certain amount of points if they got double points for every time they scored a point. Or one day I brought in blankets and put it over the nets, and they had to play without seeing like the middle of the court.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. And then another time I lowered the nets down, they all had to sit down on the ground, and we played a smaller area, and they had to kind of bum scooch around and try and. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew what I was doing in a non-linear pedagogy kind of style of thing, but I didn't really have a big plan in terms of where I was getting these kids to, except for the fact they were in grade 8 and grade 9, and I just wanted them to have a whole bunch of fun
Well, and
in their
I can
experience.
see that because there's been times where I'm like, I don't really know where we're going,
Hmm.
but if I just mess with these constraints enough,
Yeah.
take away their sight, take away the space, take away the numbers, add things
Mm.
here and there, I'm sure I'll stumble onto something worthwhile, right? And I
Yeah.
think I think everybody's probably done that before without admitting it,
Hmm.
where you're like, maybe we should just play 15 on 25 today and see how that
Yeah.
works out, right?
But I think that's good coaching, because if you go in and say, okay, we're going to do offloading today, and I'm going to ask these 5 questions, and then we're going to go to this next stage, and then we're going to do this part of offloading, and then I'm going to bring in support. Um, but what if the team's not ready for that, or what if the team's past that? As a coach, you've already planned your session to be at this certain spot, at this certain bus stop. But what if they're at another bus stop? How do you approach that? So I
Right.
don't
And
see any issue with that at all.
no, and that's where the flexibility you learn working with eighth and ninth grade women or boys or whatever, right?
Mm,
Their attention spans are like gnats anyway. So,
yeah.
and I don't think that really changes all that much in the college space
No.
either, right? And so, if the
Especially
thing
with
is,
men. Oh my
yes,
goodness.
yes, they're gonna forget your mistakes. Like, and
Yeah.
obviously, you have to be committed to forgetting theirs as well, right?
Yeah.
But they're gonna
100%.
forget your mistakes so fast, right? That really that should give you license to make them.
Mm, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Cool. And after Guatemala, we'll jump back into Guatemala. You finished up at Guatemala, came back to the US. What was your coaching role or your coaching pathway after Guatemala that ended up leading you to your role with Lindenwood?
So I just got lucky, to be honest,
Mm,
and uh, you know, right time, right place, but a whole lot of persistence as well.
yep.
Um, my wife and I, we really weren't sure where we want to live. I was doing some like contract work for a company from Spain, but
Hmm.
in Maryland, where I had family, and this small college in Massachusetts had a job to start a rugby team, and jobs like the one I have now were pretty rare then. This would have been in
Yeah.
2009,
Hmm.
so 13 years ago or something. And I called and called and called. The hiring manager was on vacation. It would be considered cyber stalking today, like the lengths I went through to contact this guy. And we're still friendly. We don't work together anymore, and he still makes fun of me to this day about it. I mean, I stalked him on Twitter, which was also kind of a new thing back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Everywhere, and so they, I finally got a hold of somebody, and they told me they weren't interviewing any out of state candidates. And I was like, oh, well, it just so happens I'm going to be in the area Tuesday. I'll show up, have my interview, and leave you guys alone. And then I hung up the phone before they could say no.
Yeah.
And works every time, some of the time, right? And so I drove up and interviewed and got the job. And my basic pitch was, well, I've worked with students in a bunch of capacities, and if I can start a rugby program and with third world resources where I don't really speak the language, I
Mm,
can do that at a Division 2 university in
100%.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And so what was that first season like?
So it's the classic American tale of just all the crossovers.
Yeah.
Let's get the kids who are maladjusted from the baseball team, the soccer team, the track team, and some of them were excellent athletes. And then from there, I could begin the more classic experience that I have now of like actually recruiting rugby players into that team. And over how long was I there? 7 years, we built a really successful women's program, and we were top 10 and 15s and top 5 and 7s. And so we had really done well with going from crossovers into more mature rugby players. And that was over 7 years at that program.
Right. And which university was that one?
That was American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts. So a very small, you'd almost say boutique college, just in an urban environment in Massachusetts. And so it had completely different challenges, right? I mean, it was a really urban area, like crime was a little bit of an issue. And so recruiting rugby players who were also like more comfortable with that environment, managing things like a scholarship budget and a travel budget, those weren't really things that I had done before. Having to go work with like from a season plan now, as a quote unquote real coach than what I was doing in Guatemala. So I mean, there were tons of challenges, and I just kind of continued to fail upward, and got a lot of grace from my administrators, a lot of grace from my students. And I was really able to grow into a professional coach there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And,
yeah.
And so how did the Lindenwood role come about after that?
So I had met the coach previous to me, like working in the summer camp setting. We were just kind of having a blast. And we had set up this little drill where, like he was going to run. It was just like shapes off 9, defense off 9, just really fun, simple stuff. And we're like, oh, let's turn some screws with these high school kids and like make it really fun. And he and I just had a blast, like coaching together. And his little group like carved my group a couple times and vice versa. And we're of course getting competitive and high-fiving the kids. And we had a great time. And he called me maybe a month later and was like, hey, I'm leaving my job. I think you should take it, And so I've had a Skype interview. This was pre-COVID, so Skype was the
Skype. That's how I did all my podcasts before COVID.
Before Zoom, right? Yeah, talk about a missed opportunity. Skype should have been Zoom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Microsoft has enough to worry about. They don't care about Skype. But anyways, so I interviewed with the administration and things like that, and then flew out to kind of see everybody, meet everybody. Met with some of the senior team, and I called my wife and just said, hey, we're going to move halfway across the country to Missouri. And she said, okay, let's do it. And
a good wife.
She is an excellent wife, beyond a measure. She was able to keep her job in Massachusetts. It's worked out for our family really well.
That's great. That's
awesome. And
our
2 kids really call this home now. My son thinks he's a college rugby player. He has 80 older brothers, 80 uncles.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he loves going in the locker room after the games and singing the victory song, eating pizza with the boys. Like he's definitely one of the guys. If you ever look on any of our social media stuff, it's almost like a Where's Waldo. You'll see a 6-year-old on somebody's shoulders somewhere, and it's just
it's great.
And it's challenging for me, right? Because now it's on me to create an environment I know he's welcome in. Right. And I have to recruit players I'm comfortable with him looking up to, because that's going to happen regardless. Right. So,
but it's also great for the young guys you're coaching as well. Like they're going to be fathers one day.
100%. And everything you do just means a little bit more when somebody's watching you. Right. Somebody, is looking up to you. And that's been great for them when we do youth clinics and we bring kids into the locker room, or we get them out coaching and things like that. And it just means that
or when
they're
out and about in the town when you're not watching them, like they're cognizant of that.
And they're with each other more. They're the only people they're with more than myself and the coaching staff, right? Then it's probably their professors and and maybe their girlfriends and parents and stuff like that after that, right? So they need to be able to look out for each other, especially when we're not around.
Yeah, cool. All right. So what's the university rugby landscape look like in terms of, competition structure, recruitment, funding, those kind of things in the United States? It's, from an outsider looking in, I'm always a little confused. There's a lot of D's, there's a lot of numbers. Talk me through it.
So the big thing for everybody, out there in the world to understand is that America, like in much of history, is kind of the Wild West. Like it's a new frontier. And Commonwealth countries in particular operate on these super rigid pathways where the money from test rugby
Mm,
funds all the way down, and it's super linear and
it's meant to.
organized. And
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's meant to, right? But we don't have that. Our union, it makes no money. We make
Mm,
no money off of test matches. We're essentially all, like, anything we do is funded directly from World Rugby. And
mm,
so there is no money to invest in college rugby or grassroots rugby or really even any
mm,
part of rugby. Like, you look at our professional league and that's all private investment. There's
mm.
no
Yeah.
uh it's not like the RFU owning the Premiership or having control over those teams.
Yeah.
These are partnership agreements, and I would put partnership in quotation marks for sure.
Yeah.
So university rugby is very much the same way. My biggest stakeholder is not my local geographical union. It's not Canterbury, right?
Mm,
It's certainly not USA Rugby or even
mm,
World Rugby.
mm.
My largest stakeholder is my employer, which is my individual university,
Yeah.
um, because they're one who signs my paycheck, who sets up our scholarship structures so we can recruit and attract talent. They're the ones who sign us up for the buses to get us to games, and
Mm,
they really are our singular stakeholder. Um, and because of that, that's where, when you mentioned a lot of D's and a lot of numbers and things like that, because there is no stronghold, because we don't have a strong national union. That's where you see competing competitions pop up. It's where
mm,
you see things sort of regionalize as needed for certain groups of schools. And that's really where a lot of the confusion comes from. And there's really good people working to sort of standardize and create, I'll call it, a more perfect union.
mhm.
But for right now, we all sort of answer to our universities, and we're in the competition that best suits our college, our university. We're very fortunate. We play amongst, I would say, the best group of colleges and universities, by playing standard organization, things like that. In the U.S., but there's a lot of other rugby going on as well. Um,
Mm,
yeah, it's like I said, it is very much the Wild West. But at the same time, the U.S. university system is the largest high performance system in the world.
yeah.
Right. So when you look at the Olympics, right? You look at like the Summer Olympics, and you're rooting for that small nation's sprinter. Well, that
Mm,
sprinter doesn't train in Paraguay. That sprinter goes to university in Florida. You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
when you look at like the Italy softball team, all of those women, for the most part, compete in America, right? And they
Mm,
just happen to
mm,
play for Italy in the Olympics. And
yeah.
so for rugby to have access to that, I believe that that's what's most unique about American rugby. No other country in the world, especially rugby country in the world, has as large a high performance system through via academics and universities as
Yeah.
America does. And
Mm.
we would do well to further leverage that for our national success.
Oh, for sure. And keeping with the Wild West theme, how are the rankings sorted out?
The rankings are crazy. I
I
think
don't I don't know, and this is not a loaded question. I
no.
try to look at it and try to understand it. I'm like, okay, there's
Yeah.
controversy here. I just don't understand it.
So the like any country, the people who, God bless them, but the people who take all of their time and energy to write on and comment on and
Hmm.
organize rugby are are just a specific type of human,
Mm,
and so it's a cottage industry here, just like it is anywhere else. And these are independent voices who have somehow kind of just been around long enough to and written enough to where people are interested in what they have to say. And then you mix those people with a subset of coaches, with a couple of conference administrators, and you get this like really strange mix. And I'm sure I don't vote on any of that stuff,
Yeah.
and so I'm sure there's like a little bit of positioning going on. I want to rank this
Mm,
team lower because my team's high, so my team can be higher. There's that in every setup everywhere.
mm,
Um, but I think one thing I'm particularly looking forward to is just moving towards a more like algorithmic distribution of rankings. So
yeah.
that takes into account things like strength of schedule, because everybody can't play everybody. The country's too big.
No,
We're too
no.
regionalized. However, the parts of the country where regions do intersect, or teams are going to fly somewhere and play somebody else, not in their comp, can really add a lot of value. And so we're
Mm,
going to put more weight on those matches, you know, as well as schedule results overall. And I think eventually we'll have a better product, but there's just a lot of trial and error,
yeah, yeah,
and and of course, everything that comes out, people are going to get upset, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I'm no different.
yeah.
We had a list of all Americans come out, and I felt a couple of schools got robbed, and I fired off a couple of salty text messages to people, and
It's good. That's awesome.
that's yeah. But as a coach, you just get so used to advocating for
Well,
your
that's your
player,
main job, right?
right? Advocating for your
Mm,
players, or and it's hard, like we were talking about identity earlier, right? And it's hard just not to take things so personally. And
yeah, yeah.
and we do have some good leadership, in the college game. And I was politely reminded of that, and said, hey, take a step back. Let's think about the process, design a better one for this coming year. And
Yeah,
and we have the impact, because again, it's the Wild West. We have the ability and the opportunity to impact those systems here in America.
yeah. Cool. All right. Well, you know, focusing just on your role at Lindenwood, what's a week look like for you in season in terms of, waking up on a Monday morning to, wrapping things up on a Sunday night?
Yeah. So I think the thing about working at a university in America is there's just so many more different groups of stakeholders.
Hmm.
So professional coaches are just are coaches primarily, right? But
Mm,
we end up being an ambassador for the game in our own, in our own little swimming pools, or in our own little ponds. And
yeah.
so, I'm part of an athletic department that has 40 some odd sports in it, all with their own head coaches, all with their own individualized need. And I report to an administrative structure, um,
Hmm.
with that deals with academics and budgets and compliance and any number of things, right? And so I have to report to all these people, and I think most coaches would be frustrated by this kind of stuff, right? Anything that gets me turning inwards, away from outwards towards the player, outwards
Mm,
towards our next jobs, things like that. And I have a great like assistant coach and a staff that kind of helps me deal with some of that stuff, so I can keep my focus outward. But everything from you know Zoom calls with potential students all over the world, to raising money, shoring
mm,
up our finances with donations, and
yeah.
building that group of donors, engaging like alumni and previous, members of the club and students of the university, who do want to give back in money, time, or talent. And so then, the fight ends up being, well, coaching the team, as far as everybody else is concerned, is your last job, right? But to you, it
Mm,
has to be your first job. And so
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
always that tension as a university coach of, okay, am I staying up to speed with what I hope is best practice now? Am
Mm,
am I, are my deliverables to the students at a professional standard that like I can appreciate, and I think they'll appreciate as well? Am I coming in with fresh ideas that challenge them, or are there going to be those weeks when we're just going through the motions and we're just kind of getting through it? And
mm,
it is challenging because you are tugged at in a lot of different directions. But yeah, the week, for us, we'll train, Monday, Tuesday. I mean, we train every day. It changes, right? So Monday, we'll have just a quick meeting and an install session. We have a great strength and conditioning coach in a large gym. It actually used to
Mm.
be a horse barn,
Oh,
and
wicked.
so yeah, they go and work with our strength and conditioning coach. She's excellent, super professional. And then Tuesday, we tend to front load our week, so we'll have a big contact session on Tuesday. Get those collisions in, depending on the time of the year it is, how many we're going for. And then Wednesday they're really recovering from that, so we'll have a small kicking session, small line out session. They'll go in for another lift, but physio's open to the guys,
Mm.
athletic therapy, that kind of stuff is available. And then Thursday, we're training in our teams for the weekend. Kind of more game plan oriented. We do a lot of the modern stuff. We try to hit our total meter targets for the week with GPS periodization and
Mm.
monitoring and whatnot, and try to do the same with collisions and high speed meters. I find the hardest part of all of that is just it's easy for guys to just kind of get through a practice, or you just always need to like keep an eye out on your high speed meters, right? Some
Yeah.
players are like way too much, and then other guys are just kind of trotting through practice. So how do you kind of manufacture that to get them in a sweet spot to where
Mm. Mm.
they're ready to play? And then Friday, we'll travel, or a captain's run if we're home, another weight session for guys who aren't playing, or just a prep session for guys who are in the weight room.
Mm.
And then, group meetings, things like that. But the weeks kind of tick, and then we'll play 1 to 3 matches on the weekend. And then, Saturday, we have a lively home atmosphere, and it's a lot of fun to bring players into. And we might
Mm.
have potential students visiting, and we'll bring them into the locker room so they can kind of get a look at everything. Or you do that Saturday morning breakfast pregame.
Yeah.
We joke around and call it like a jazz brunch, and they go into the wrestling room, do a little like primer, wrestle a little bit just to get the
Yeah.
testosterone going. So
Yeah.
it's a really full week for the guys, and I think it's important to keep your finger on the pulse. It's easy to overprogram, and
Yeah.
we've certainly been guilty of that. So keeping your finger on the pulse, whether you survey them, whether you meet with them, whatever
Mm.
that is, and just make sure everybody's having fun and feeling fresh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's pretty important.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
Sunday tend to be for analysis, and
Mm-hmm.
then Monday you're right back
Back
at it.
at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And you had a pretty good year with the MLR draft. Can you talk a little bit through that? Some of the success that the university achieved there and the players themselves.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So it's been the advent of the MLR and this sort of like nascent professional era that we're in the
Mm.
US has really changed why players look at certain colleges, and changed what they want their outcomes to be. And so there's been a learning curve there for me personally. And just the things they say are different now. Not all the time, but plenty of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that I really like about it is that our national teams are now taking players from the MLR, not from the college ranks.
Yeah.
So when I first started at Lindenwood, we had a good handful of guys that were getting regular playing time with the USA, and it was very, very difficult for them to keep up with their studies and go and
Yeah.
play. And if I'm an international coach who's going to lose his job if I lose this match, because that's a thing that happens if you're an international coach,
Mm.
I don't really care about Timmy's studies or his
Yeah.
degree or things like that. I just need this player, and I'm willing to use World Rugby regulations to strong arm him into playing for me, right?
Mm.
For which for the USA is like minimal to no pay, right? So
Yeah.
and so it was really difficult. But now that the MLRs come in, it's been a good buffer for us and in the
Yeah.
college ranks. And so despite the changing of the players like stated desired outcomes, um, and so we have had a lot of success. I think we have as professional of a setup as possible without with the level of staffing that we have, and while allowing the guys to fully focus on getting a meaningful degree, right?
Yeah.
And that's really where the US system sets itself apart, but I think we're doing really well to maximize that. um, I get great feedback from the people who run MLR teams that our players, when they arrive, they are they're prepared for the next level. There's of course things they need to learn and get up to speed on, but they understand how to fight for a spot, how to get better, how to be coached. And that feels good, right? As a sort of creator of a program, right? That it's
Yeah.
certainly working. And so last year we had the most players drafted. I believe we had 6 players drafted, and even more importantly, all 5 out of those 6 received meaningful playing time in the league, in their first year out, which I think
Yeah.
is the best sign. And the one who didn't was hung up on visa issues. So I'm not gonna, I'll go ahead and take that win as well,
Yeah.
right?
That's
And
six
so
on six.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so this year, we had 5 players drafted, the most in the league. And I think now um, as teams are building their own structures, be it regional high school academies, be it sub academies for their professional team, we're seeing more of our players who graduate who aren't drafted get invited down on like a 3-week training contract
Mm,
for these games for a tryout type, mid to long term stint, which again is a good sign of success.
yeah.
And so it's kind of uh, it's great for those guys, but we still have other guys who are going to graduate and get good jobs and be really good clubmen as well, and understand the game well. And we have a kid who's just recently graduated, and he's moving out to play for a club, and I was like, he'll start at scrum half for your club for 20 years, like
Mm,
that's like, as a
mm.
club, like what else could you
No, there's
really
value
want?
in that, right?
There's so
Like,
much
there's
value
just
in
as much value in that for
it,
me.
exactly, and the
Yeah.
student's going to extract value from that club and them helping him start a new life in a tough
Hmm.
to crack into city. And that's kind of the way rugby always worked, right?
Yeah.
And I see no reason why it can't continue to work like that as well.
No.
And
No.
and for those to be really valuable and attainable outcomes to, 75% of the kids who play university rugby.
Yeah. Well, I came to Canada 17 years ago, met my wife who played in the rugby, the women's team of my club here, the Montreal Irish. I then moved back here 15 years ago. We continued to play. We got married. We've got 3 kids. We always talk about our friends and how 95% of our friends are somewhat involved in rugby. And yeah, I think that's really important. I think a lot of coaches can get hung up on, and I've definitely fallen into that trap. Is, oh, how many players have I got into a U20 national team, or how many have kicked on to professional? But it's, how many are still playing now that you coached 10 years ago? Like that's also a massive win.
I get now, I'm starting to get the messages, coach, I'm in charge of this high school team and I have
Ah, they're
no
the
idea
best.
what to
Yeah.
do. Yeah, those are always so fun. And
Yeah.
like, can you send me like our attack documents, like from when I played? I'm just going to steal them. I'm like, you're
Yeah,
not
that's not
stealing them.
gonna
They're
work.
yours. No, you're yours. Start there and
Go
then see
make the
what they like
mistakes.
and scrap it, like
Yeah, yeah,
it's really fun. It's really fun to have those conversations now.
yeah.
And it's just as rewarding. And those are different sorts of trophies, right? Those are
Mm,
conversations you're having on a really personal level with somebody. And you sort of watch them grow and fail as a university student, and you help them along in that. And they've started this whole other period of life as a postgraduate, and now
yeah,
you get to watch them grow and fail and grow and fail in that. And it's like it's the rewarding part of being a coach, isn't it?
yeah, 100%. Cool. And what about you mentioned your assistant coaches there? How do you engage with your assistant coaches into, making sure that you as a group are constantly growing, constantly developing, that there's, accountability, between you and them and you? What's some of your processes there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways, right? So I spoke before about uh well, let me back up there. Uh you have to have just really good channels of communication, and
Mm,
coaches need to every coach is going to have an ego. Um you don't want to get rid of it. You want to really care
hmm.
about what you're doing and take pride in what you're doing, and that's a lot of the function of your ego, right? But if you can't just put it in a drawer for a little while and have a good conversation with somebody, or for me as a coach, if I'm not willing to have that conversation, I'm doing a disservice to that coach. And
Totally agree.
yeah, and we have we have a group of like 6 to 8 coaches, kind of somewhere in there. And we all, we're most of us are about the same age. Some are younger and they're just now getting married, but a lot of us have kids the same age and are in a similar station in life. And it makes it really easy to kind of carry weight for each other from time to
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna have to miss a match because my sister's getting married this fall. She didn't get the no weddings in the fall like rugby memo, and so
We got married on a Sunday because of that memo.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Lots of people know it. Apparently my sister doesn't. That's okay.
Yeah.
And but and so I'll miss a match weekend, this fall, and I have literally nothing to worry about. And the rest of the staff will split up in 2 different places. And I know like they'll look after the operations people. Like we have players who are either hurt or have had to hang up the boots, or even people who are just interested in athletic communication or operations that help out with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so they'll grab the footage, they'll get everything done that needs to be done, And so if you can't extricate yourself from the process every now and then, you're probably holding on too tight as well.
Yeah, agree.
And so there has to be that trust and communication. And then, your job is as head coach, I think, is just to bring like ideas, bring processes. And one thing that, I'm really loving is we have a young, he helps out with the scrum mainly, but he's really interested in attack. Well, he's also coaching. He coaches on the side with us, but he's also coaching like a men's club team, that's not a huge commitment, but now he's taking some of our concepts in attack, boiling them down to like their simplest iterations, building it into that men's club, and then coming back to me with notes. Like I felt this worked. I felt this, like, why would that? And I got to watch the men's club game and talk to him like, hey, would you like a note about your attack on the weekend? He's like, yeah, of course. And so again, just being able to take ideas from each other, put them in different scenarios. I think every coach you've had on your podcast would say something along the lines of, coaching is theft and adaptation, right?
Yeah,
and so
100%.
So but just doing that kind of in each other, and then, listening to ideas. So we have a lot of players. Training needs to be really well organized. We don't have time to stand around. And so understanding, well, if we worked in 4 groups this week, or if we move this part of training to this part, we might get, they might have more energy when we really need them to have it. All right, well, let's try it this week and see how that goes.
Yeah.
We're more married to each other than we are married to the way we do things, right? And so if a coach has an idea that I want to support, like it's incumbent to me to support that idea until it until it proves itself useful or otherwise, right? But if you nix everything right away, sorry, if you nix everything right away, the coach doesn't feel useful, right?
No.
And I don't know, you just want to give people that space and initiative. And sometimes, I think it was today, I was in my office with one of the coaches, and I just said, sometimes I don't say anything because I want to give people space and see if they take it, right? Whether that be an operations manager, an assistant coach, or things like that. And he's like, yeah, if you don't know me really well, you might say, well, that's intimidating, right? Because I don't know what to do. I'm on edge. But the people who do work closely with me, they know, well, Macy's giving me space. I'm going to take it. I'm going to say my piece or use my idea. And I think just giving the people around you space, and again, you're just going to learn more about those coaches too, right? And what they need from you. And so, space, communication, and then I would say not lack of ego, but the adjustment of ego is important.
Yeah, no, they're great points, and it probably leapfrogs me into my second last or penultimate question. What about your coaching philosophy? What would you feel? I hate the word non-negotiables, but what would you feel are some things in your coaching philosophy that you hold pretty dear and feel are pretty key to any team that you're going to be involved in?
So I really enjoy bouncing back from a bad session.
Right.
So nothing gets me more fired up than when we like suck on a Tuesday, and I go in and you review the footage, you review the numbers, and you have an impression that you were terrible on the Tuesday. And then you kind of review your materials and you're like, yep, you confirm it. Yes, we were terrible. And then you have a turnaround where you're like, all right, we're going to get it back. And for me, it kind of goes back to like my core, right? How do I just inject a little bit of fun, let everybody know like it's all right, right? And then carry on from it. And I think that's been a strength of my coaching. It's been part of who I am as a coach for sure. Is just being able to leave it behind, bounce back, and get back to being, like I said before, fun and flexible, and just get after it that next day. And players need to understand that they're going to have bad sessions too, right? And you know what? And maybe they get dropped, right? If they have a bad session, there are consequences. It's hard. I know we want to be compassionate, we want to love everybody, but there are real consequences to bad form, right?
For sure. Yeah.
But we need to help them understand that it's like they're only as good as their next day, right? And so you've just got to move on with it and go. And so I really enjoy that. And I would just say energy in the session, not necessarily from me. I'm not the run around and shout coach or anything like that, but our sessions tend to have a lot of energy, a lot of enjoyment, and we lean heavy on student leadership as well. There's way more of them than there are of us, despite having a large coaching staff for a university team. And that's one thing that rugby stands out on our campus on compared to other sports. For instance, lots of USA rugby coaches would have had this experience where like every football coach in America got a hold of Legacy, the All Blacks book about leadership. They all read it. There was a summer where they were all gushing.
Not sure the All Blacks read it, but anyhow.
Yeah. That's neither here nor there. But I can confirm that every football coach I know read it because they all sent me the same 3 text messages, right? And
they're all sweeping sheds and all that
yes,
stuff.
no, that's what it was. So the head like conditioning coach for the football team comes up to me and goes, "Oh yeah, so I read this book. I talked to the guys about it. It was so awesome, transformative, man." And he's like, "Now at the end of weights, I just say sweep the sheds, and they all clean up so fast." And I just said, I stopped him, and we had a good relationship, right? You'd be a total douchebag to do this to somebody that you didn't know well. I was just like, "Coach, why do you have to say it?"
Yeah.
And he was in the middle of a run. He took his headphones out or anything like that, and he just kind of like turned his head to the side a little bit and said, "Man, you're right." And he put his earphones in and just like kept jogging away. And he caught up with me about it afterwards. And I'm like, the whole point of it goes back to that student leadership, right? It's for them. It's for it to matter to them, not for it to matter to you.
Yeah.
And so
you can't force it.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had a great talk about that. And that particular coach actually works for the special forces in the US now, like conditioning soldiers. So again, like these people just end up everywhere. I mean, that's rugby, isn't it? And so I would just say like our administration loves that we seem to be actively engaged in the production of student leaders. So for instance, our guys love to go cheer for our ice hockey team, right?
Nice.
They love to bang on the glass, and a lot of international boys, so they've never really seen ice hockey. It's just the same way I approach rugby. It's just this crazy chaotic game. I've never seen it before, right? And they love banging on the glass, and I'm sure they're swearing at the other team, as is customary in ice hockey, right? You're in Canada, nobody chirps like an ice hockey player,
or a scrum half.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's where they learn it from. And so whenever it gets out of hand, like our security people and everything, they're like, "Oh, I know. I can just, whenever I'm not happy with how things are going, I just go talk to your captain and get sorted out." And so it's like they're never really a worry. Sometimes there's a little bit too much energy, but they know exactly who to go to. They know exactly how to speak to them, and no one ever gets in trouble. They're just like, "Oh, I'll just go talk to captain of whoever it is, and it'll get taken care of." And I'm like, "Thank you very much for doing that."
Perfect. That's
perfect. And so if we're developing a group that can have that sort of energy and that sort of environment, but still regulate itself as sort of this large living, breathing cloud of testosterone on our university campus. We're doing a really good job.
I agree. Cool. Well, we always wrap things up with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up, whether it be rugby or any other sport, who was one of the players that you idolized, you looked up to, and you thought, I like what they're doing?
So in American sports, I loved Isaiah Thomas growing up,
Okay.
and the Detroit Pistons,
Right.
because they were all attitude. They weren't the best athletes. They weren't, but they found a way. Like, and again, they were that version of like a really gritty team. I know that
Yeah.
term is very much in vogue now. Grit, and but
It's like
they were
non-negotiables.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Or
Same
I mean,
feelings.
high performance.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
see.
all
There's
that.
so many, so
Yeah.
many.
Culture.
Don't forget that one. And so they were they were grit personified, back in
Yeah.
the day, and they would do whatever it took to win. And I loved Isaiah Thomas in particular, but that whole Bad Boys Pistons era growing up. And then I would say rugby. I've been secretly coaching every hooker I've ever coached to play like Scott Brits for Saracens.
Right, yeah.
And so
It's a beauty.
I just loved, I just loved all the different ways they used him. I loved that he was involved in counterattack, that he was involved as a playmaker. And I don't know, I always admired their coaches for saying, okay, we have this player who really is an amazing player, an international caliber player, just happened to be born at the same time as like one of their best captains ever.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do we use him for who he is, right? For the player he is and what he can bring to the side. And I just admire that. It takes courage to coach that way, especially in the professional ranks. And, I remember sharing his highlights with a hooker that I coached for a long time. And he even said, he's like, "Oh my God, coach, you've been coaching me to be this guy this whole time." I'm like, yeah, I guess I have, and he was a super handy player. Like we used him to like manage our snap call, like as a hooker, he would just trail the breakdown. And if he saw anything on the weak side, like he overruled the fly out, and so he did lots of little stuff like that I loved on the field. And so I was like, oh, let's run with it, and so he's rugby wise, he's probably my favorite player ever.
All right, cool. And what about now? Who are some players you like watching?
Players now I like watching. I really like, so not necessarily individual players, but I love, there's sort of there's tension at the international level now between sort of ruthless efficiency and and playing like an ideal style of rugby, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Ireland versus All Blacks is a good example.
Yeah, a great one. Or I would even say you have like South Africa and France together, right?
100%, yeah.
Along with All Blacks on the other side, where it's like, all right, what is our minimum acceptable outcome for this possession, and how do we get to that outcome with as little risk and few phases as possible, right? Because and to be honest, in the heat of COVID, we were fortunate. We were able to play rugby. That's how we played, because we weren't fit. The referees weren't fit. The opponents weren't fit. So it was more about energy than it was risk. So if we can win a rugby match in 5,000 meters versus 7, like let's try and do that. Right.
Yeah.
We are training them almost like MMA fighters. We are almost only doing contact area stuff, not a lot of high speed stuff. And so trying to just be as efficient as possible, and watching the tension between those styles of rugby is really, really interesting right now. And it certainly makes like test match Saturdays worth watching.
Yeah, agree. All right. And third question, what about a high profile coach? Who do you like that's, doing good stuff internationally, or, pretty public profile?
So with my favorite player ever, Scott Brits, I just liked how he was able to kind of break the mold and just play rugby in a different way, in a way that suited him in particular. And I think Jamie Joseph is doing that better than anybody else right now. Japan has so many unique parameters via culture and physicality and everything else, that if he just tried to coach like everybody else, they would get played off the park.
For sure. Yeah.
But they're one of the only examples of a tier 2 country going, into tier 1 status, which I think happens far too infrequently in world rugby. And that's, obviously he's building on foundations laid by Eddie Jones and things like that, but he's continued that, and he's even taken it to another level where the pace and the ingenuity that they play with is just really refreshing. You can only watch like so many 3-man pods, on a Saturday without one
with
to
a
see
latch.
like,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Oh, you guys watched that YouTube video too. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I just think he's really interesting. And when you talk about coaching as sort of organizing the team within the parameters that you're given, he has the most unique set of parameters, and he's done the best job with them.
Cool. Okay, awesome, man. What about grassroots coach? Last question. Who's someone who deserves a shout out in your community?
And in my community, that's Jimmy Harrison. He was my first assistant coach at Lindenwood. He's quickly shot up the ranks here in the USA, and he's now the head analyst for the men's senior national team.
Awesome.
He would be at home in any international setup in the world. Like his outcomes and his high standards for himself and his detail-oriented nature just really put the game into a perspective that coaches and players can understand. And it's hard, when you really think about it, it's hard to train for a game when you have no idea what it actually entails, what the demands of it are. And I just think he expresses that in such a relatable way, that he's just a really valuable coach, and he'll do really well, whether that's with the USA or moving on into other professional ranks. But Jimmy's the man.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's a perfect way to finish, and great shout out for Jimmy. And really want to thank you, Josh, for coming on the show and sharing all the details of what's happening, all the good things that are happening at Lindenwood. I loved reflecting on my time in Guatemala, even though it was not rugby based, but it's an awesome country, and so cool to hear that you pretty much started rugby there. So that was awesome. And yeah, so thanks very much for coming on the show and sharing your story.
No, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you again.
Yeah, no worries. Perfect. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.